good? Okay. Yeah, first of all, apologies for being a bit late, but thank you all for being here so much. I think what we will do today, I would really love to have, to hear from all of you who are here, and maybe have this more as an open conversation and a little sharing session. Because in the rare occasion that we have an IRL/AFK exhibition, and me myself also not being out of my house too much, working remotely mostly all the time, I'm really, really excited to share a space with you all. So I hope that this little talk or this little session can be more of an effort to hold space for a discussion, because at the end of the day, the exhibition is really about empathy and the different embodiments of empathy alongside different emotions and different things like fear, coming from Natasha's work. So yeah, I think maybe it would be best to just start with a little eye opener. We have a video sent in from Natasha. Really unfortunate she's not able to be here. I wish she was here right here with us. But we have a video sent in from her where she basically talks a bit about her practice, but more importantly her research that has gone into these two works, Wanak Wituwatu and the Epoch of Mapulusen. I won't say too much. If there's any need for me to supplement with information, then I will, but maybe we'll just start off with the video.
Tabea, Wengileos, Patuariwaya, Sigiwangko. Good evening, everyone. Hope you are well and safe in the age of anxiety. Here I am, Natasha, happy to see everyone through cyberspace. I am sorry that this video will be a bit fragmented, but today I would like to share part of the research I did regarding Minasan Cosmology, its relation to technology, and the pilgrimage to the ancestors of Minahasa. Minahasa is a sub-ethnic in North Sulawesi, Indonesia. In the past few years, I tried to revisit the indigenous Minasan philosophy, cosmology, and how it could be adjusted in contemporary society, especially in relation to the globalized world. Never thought I had imagined that I would learn and unlearn my indigenous knowledge through the process of making Wa'anak Wituwatu. I encounter a relation between human, non-human entities, femininity, colonial knowledge, and technology in the process. In the making of the work, I participated in some rituals. One of the ancient rituals that I observed and participated is Ba'ator in Mahtambuleleng, meaning full moon ritual, a ritual that generates a phenomenon named Pakampetan, where a state of monism between human and the earth is achieved through ancestral conversations mediated by Tonaas, a customary title of traditional religious leader or mediator. In Sambaator, I found myself communicating with the ancestral spirits whom we call Opo or Apo in Tontemboan language. Doing the ritual can be in Watu Pinawetengan or other ancestral sites, Waruga, the sarcophagus, or can be anywhere depending on the sign from our ancestors. For centuries, In the Minasan culture, technological apparatus for ritualistic purposes and healing process has been their epistemological attempt to maintain the equilibrium amongst human and non-human kin. In my field research on stone culture in Minasa, I found that it's more than just a human-non-human relation. The stone determines their practice of commoning land. Also, this leads me to reconstruct Minasan philosophy of Mapalus. And this is the Epoch of Mapulusen scheme. About the stone culture in Minasa, no one talks about this importance. I also wanted to research the ancestral knowledge that I have known since I was a child, but never paid that much attention to. When I visited Watu Pinawetengan site and participated in other ancestral rituals, I knew that these practices have been misunderstood by many as heresy, as an ancient practice that shouldn't exist in the modern world. What makes them threatening to the Christian majority in North Sulawesi, which is one of the biggest Christian communities in the vastly Islamic majority of Indonesia. This leads me to think that historical artifacts have been constructed in popular belief as taboo, which further marginalize the indigenous people of the region. In order to rethink my position as a diasporic Minasan, I try to develop a different way of seeing the ritual, the relation between the authorities that control reality by fabricating history and resistance of the indigenous community. In most rituals, I encountered a moment where myself communicating with my ancestors through mediation by Tonaas, that is mostly male dominated in this current state. Departing from a curiosity to investigate the femininity in ritualism in Minasa, I try to record and reflect on one of Baator sessions I participate with female Tonaas as mediator. I did this to experience a ritual in which the mediator was a woman. The conversation with my ancestors, regardless of the gender of the mediator, turned out filled with conversation about womanhood and the heteronormative domestic sphere. Through Anak Wituwatu, I tried to reconfigure and build a reflective dialogue on an ancient ritual practice that has been carried out for centuries and its interaction with contemporary worldviews. If the first human in Minasan cosmology was a woman called Opo Karema, why do the rituals carried out in the 21st century still consider the role of women as navigators in domestic space? What if I can do the ritual without a mediator? Will the ancestral spirits still give me the same advice to me to change my appearance to be more feminine? Could it be that this ancestral advice of my womanhood is a sample of complex contemporary Minasan cosmology that is interlinked with the cultural trajectory of ideology in Minasa, from colonialism, monotheism, nation state, and capitalism? Expanding my artistic research in Minasan Cosmology, out of curiosity and at my will, I am currently doing a new body of work that is developing a querying approach in understanding one of the main ritual ceremonies of Karai. Karai is a ritual which Minasan warriors are dressed with invisible armor to make them invulnerable for tribe war. In contemporary Minahasa, Karai is the mostly understood as hypermasculine ritual, as most of the participants are male tribesmen. However, this is not merely a field research, but more a spiritual and personal experience. I am exploring the potential idea of speculative care in Karai, as this ritual is closely connected to the notion of wear, symbols, and clothes, and as the myth of Minasan cosmology that the world is not heteronormative playground. I will observe the possibility to destabilizing and reconfiguring the assumption of Karai in relation to the idea of care and invulnerability instead of aggression and masculinity. Karai is a coming of age ritual, not a spell for practicing superpower. Perhaps there isn't any words to explain how the ritual Karai went, but I'm going to share my very personal experience on participating the procession of Karai. My feelings upon meeting my ancestors few weeks ago. I had my uterus lining shed a day before the ritual. Such a fate that I can't deny. My olfactory perceived the blood like an iron which energy flame into masculine and feminine. Microcosmic and macrocosmic melts into the moon cycle. I was too afraid to tell anyone. Instead, I prayed to Opo, Empung, for my goodwill and perseverance. This cycle is always painful, and I am perplexed by the judgment and the embodied knowledge towards menstruation built by the biopolitics idea of patriarchal society. To a great degree, when it comes to sacred ritual, usually women are banned from the sacred site, whilst the pain and the endurance is a peripheral outside the patriarch cupola. The shedding blood means fertility. At the end, Tona'a said I was the first woman that had an ancestral blessing to participate in the ritual Karai. This is something I found really interesting, the entanglement between ancestor knowledge, modernity, and femininity that is embedded in this kind of ritualistic practice. To end my presentation, I would like to acknowledge the ancestors of Tau Minasa. It is my privilege and pleasure to tamper with the historical and mythical account of Minasa. However, in this instance, I feel an apology is due to the people who have lived during the colonial era in Minasa. In my defense, I can only acknowledge the ancestries of Tau Minahasa, Karema, Lumimuut, and Toar, people of the Malesung land, as well as to the elders whom we call Opo from the past and the present and the future of Malesung land. The indigenous sovereignty of paying respect to the ancestors between stones and human deemed as something unusual. Modern society sees this phenomena as irrational. Furthermore, it is alienated by modern religion. Yet I acknowledge the pack of stone Watu Pinawetengan made by 9 ancestors, the ancient artifacts Lisung of the origins of Lumimuot and Toar's descendant, and the first person was a woman, the goddess Karema, who gave birth through a stone. And this is a picture of me on my birthday. Another ritual named Lumuang, part of the Karai procession. Mah keter-keter, sako ma belajar. Pakatuan wo pakalawiren, makapulu sama, tamber wangko. Thank you so much.
Does anyone have first thoughts that came to your mind when you saw the video from Natasha? I was personally really, really moved. What did you think, Nina? Was there anything that particularly stood out to you?
Yeah, I think I wasn't that much aware before I saw this video that
Yeah.
she, as born female, is like one of the first people to go through this ritual that is traditionally this, like, in youth initiation ritual for tribesmen, I suppose, and that is, yeah, it was so interesting to bring this idea of gender fluidity to her, to this traditional practices.
Yeah, I think it was really, really great, and I'm so grateful to Natasha for sharing this video because these two works, they sort of actually form one work. It's a bit unusual that way. There are two videos made separately, but they were formed as one work. And from what I understand from the video here, she started off with Wanak Wituwatu, which is the one that you see on the projector, which was mainly exploring the stone culture and the communication that the Minasan people have with the stone in this video. But then I think she, through reflecting on her research, she also realized that there's one more aspect to it that people don't really talk about, which is that their stone culture and their cosmology actually informs also their political system and the ways that they form an economy within the tribe and with other tribes. And therefore, the Epoch of Mapulusen is a little bit more propositional in the sense that the Epoch of Mapulusen actually speculates what if the rest of the world also operates on the political system of Mapulus, which is the political system of the Minasan tribe. So that video there on the TV screen, it's called the Epoch of Mapulusen. And actually, these posters here, you also saw a little bit in her video, but the posters are actually something that I really wanted to also bring to this exhibition because these are. Natasha also has a graphic design practice, and I think it's really important to acknowledge that because it's one thing to be an artist and it's another thing to also be a designer, because as a designer, you are putting something out there in the world, actively communicating with it. And so I wanted to acknowledge her graphic design practice. And actually, she didn't do these posters sort of like for fun or to just hang around. These are actually the notes that she takes for herself to understand her works. And actually, when she's told me that when she has to, give a presentation about the videos or about her works, she's actually referring to this. So this is sort of like how she processes her work. And I wanted to share that because in this exhibition, one underlying layer is the ways that we collect knowledge and the ways that we understand the world. So having this sort of like a meta layer of like, you know, having Natasha show like an artifact from her own research and the ways that she understands her own work was just something that I wanted to add in this exhibition. But for those of you who maybe are coming here for the first time, and if you have not had the chance to sit down for about 40 minutes in total to watch these two videos. So these two videos are based off Natasha's pilgrimage to to the minority tribe that she is a descendant from, and you see a lot of documentary footage like these, and like these are the 3D animations that she's created. And one really important sort of like one very important perspective for me when understanding her work was when I asked her, like, do you consider this as a documentary? Because when people are sort of like asking me about this work, it's maybe easy to say it as a documentary, but I want to hear from you, like how truthful, in a sense, do you, or how accurate a depiction of this do you see? Because most people, myself included, have not heard of the Minasan tribe. I don't know much about indigenous communities. And even when we think of indigenous communities, we maybe don't really think about indigenous communities in Indonesia. Maybe our mind wanders off to like the Amazon, for example, as the most emblematic place on earth. But so I felt it was important for me to clarify whether or not this was like considered a documentary. And she said it's a quasi-documentary in the sense that, yes, you see footages, but it's mostly her speculating. It's mostly her speculating the histories and the myths, sort of like rewriting what has been institutionally documented about the Minasan tribe. And the parts where you see are 3D animations, she said that those were actually the parts, and I think she has mentioned a little bit in the video, those are the parts that she could not really explain or capture with video footage or with photographs or with words even. And therefore, that's why she's created these 3D animation and she's put in some nonsense poetry as her own personal method of representing and understanding the experience that she's had. Because I think, as you can tell, it was really, it was a really unique experience that she had gone through in her pilgrimage, which I believe is ongoing. And so this, I was first also absolutely captured by these two works by Natasha because it was the first time that I saw the stone, which is, I think, very emblematic in the world of contemporary art. We talk a lot about the stone in post-apocalyptic contexts and in new materialism and in speculative realities, which are all, I mean, in my understanding and in my readings, I understand these sort of like theories and concepts as coming from the Western world. And when I saw Natasha's work, it wasn't that like, this was like a non-Western point of view. It wasn't about that. It was more like, I realized it was the first time I saw the stone as an anecdote rather than just a metaphor, as an artifact, as a cultural artifact, and even as an economical artifact, rather than just a metaphor to talk about things as like, oh, these things are alive and these things are not, animist beliefs and all that, and etc. So her work really struck to me, and like because it gave me that clarification that maybe we should be thinking things less as metaphors and understanding even objects more as anecdotes or as artifacts of life and non-life. And so that was kind of like my entrance, and the sort of like the beginning of this exhibition. I really wanted to show Natasha, and the more I got into the work, the more I saw actually it was really it was very important for me, the ways that she makes sense of the world through fiction and through speculation. And that's how Nina's work also came to my mind, because the both of them use fiction as a method of speculative thinking, as a method of sort of making sense of the world. And even though, and they're coming at it from like vastly different directions, but in the end, there are also aspects and layers of um, of, of empathy contrasted with fear. I think Natasha has mentioned a lot in the video how she's trying to queer this tribal ritual that she has experienced, because on one hand it is seen as something that is very aggressive and masculine, but actually the people are understanding it more as invulnerability and strength. And these things are interesting because it's, in the end, it's all about perspectives, and it's important to acknowledge subjectivity. But let's talk about this, the very, very fundamental idea in this exhibition, which is about this making sense of the world. And I think then it would be really, really great for Nina to tell us a little bit about her practice. But yeah, I think in terms of this making sense of the world, I think the ways that I come to understand it in the last 2 years has been a lot about, the last 2 years my headspace has really been like occupied by the world of technology, and more recently Web3 and crypto, and dealing with a lot of art at the intersections of technology and science, and it seems like we're kind of speaking about the world and speaking about things as if they're sort of like at the tips of our fingers, and things are going to get easier and easier, and even though we're like early days or whatever, it's like it's gonna be okay, it's gonna be much better, it's gonna be more user friendly, and so on and so forth, and we're going to understand the world so much better. And there's also this question of like how far would you go to sort of understand the world? Is that something we're actively thinking of? And maybe here I would just divert to Nina, because she has a few works here which actually directly addresses that question.
Yeah, I mean, especially this question of sense making of the world, or different forms of gaining knowledge about ecological systems or the world we as humans inhabit, is something that I'm really interested in. And for me, the whole starting point of my works here in this exhibition is the sound piece that we're going to turn back on after this talk, if you would like to listen to it. And the production of that started off with my interest for acoustic ecology. And that is basically the study of acoustic relationships of humans, living entities, animals, plants, artifacts, human-made artifacts as well. And through sound, like, we can actually learn a lot about our environment, but also the ecological systems. Not only with like the technology of actually recording sound, are we able to analyze these acoustic environments, as in acoustic soundscapes, like a landscape only in sound. For example, in a forest, there's all kinds of different beings that make sound. That starts with the wind that's rustling through leaves, to all kinds of different insects, amphibians, and so on, that make noise to communicate with each other, that use sound to communicate, and all of this is a very fragile, balanced system. Generally, the louder an undisturbed ecosystem like this is, the healthier it is. As soon as one of these voices is removed through human intervention, like there's a lot of species that don't exist anymore, and they leave gaps in this ecological carpet. So the less noisy it is in an environment like the forest, like the ocean, the worse. But there's also noises that we as humans add to this layer. Like if you think of the ocean, humans are extremely loud in the ocean. There's gigantic transportation ships. There is commercial cruise ships. There is oil rigs, exactly. And they all are enormously loud and disturbing this really fragile ecosystem that communicates through sounds and that exists through sound. And when I was here I was in Istanbul for a couple of months in 2019 and had the chance to speak to Tayfun Akgül from the Technical University in Istanbul, who works with soundscapes and who has made a lot of recordings here in the Bosphorus and in the Aegean Sea. And his specialty is a species called the pistol shrimp. And this species exists in most seas, most oceans in the world, in different, slightly different forms. And it's a type of shrimp that makes a snapping sound. And they live in these like really big colonies, meaning that if like a lot of shrimp snap together, it makes this like humming background noise in the ocean that is in fact so loud that it is loud enough to drown out the communication of submarines. And this is how we learned about the existence of these shrimps, because military submarines were disturbed in their communication systems through these tiny shrimps that in their big number made such a big noise that the submarines just couldn't communicate. And like that is for me like a really interesting intersection of culture and nature that comes together there, or like technology. Like that on the one hand there is of course the whole ecosystem, the shrimp that are disturbed by the submarine coming in, but then also there is the shrimp that disturbs this big, monstrous, metallic creature that comes into their world, which also can be really problematic for smaller fish that orientate themselves with the help of this noise in the ocean, and that they then can't hear so well anymore. But on the other hand, submarines also are able to hide in this like noise that is produced by these shrimp. So it goes both ways somehow. And that was the basic idea for me to make this sound piece. Like I wanted to make a fictional soundscape that brings together the existence of these tiny shrimp and this brutal idea of a submarine. Submarines are inherently thought of as objects to secretly intrude in an enemy's territory underwater. And all of these neon sculptures that you see around here in the gallery are early drawings of ideas of submarines that were more or less functional. The one in the background, for example, is a drawing by Dennis Papins from 1670, I believe. It was very much non-functional, but the idea remained the same as in the later models. Like this one, for example, was called Nautilus and was constructed by Robert Fulton. and this one is in 1800, and this one is called Argonaut and was drawn in 1890, I think. Yeah, but inherently these submarines they're made for intruding. They're made for secretly being invasive, in a sense. So, and in the sound piece, in the end, I brought together like the snapping of the shrimp, this like noise that drowns out the noise, the closer coming the noise of a ship, and then sometimes the ship drowns out the snapping of the shrimp as well. And there's voices in the sound piece as well that can be heard as the shrimp. They sometimes speak in the we form, speak about themselves. But then also there's times where it could be the submarine speaking and they interrupt each other, and this is a group, it's a swarm intelligence speaking there. In the sound piece, there's some sounds that are recorded. There's some underwater recordings in there to set the idea of you are underwater, but most sounds in there, including the shrimp sounds, are actually they're computer generated, they're made, or they're what they're supposed to be, but they invoke the idea of what you want them to hear in the sound piece when you have the idea that you are underwater. So I'm making a whole fictional soundscape here of like things I want to bring together. I'm going to have some water and let Jing talk maybe.
What was maybe the most interesting thing for me about these neon sculptures? I to be very honest, I really deliberated over the material of neon because it's really common, I think, and I really dug into my own like brain, and I really asked myself, and I asked Nina also, why neon, and like, is this really the right material to do it? And I think I would love to hear from you also, because it's not the first time you're working with neon. This is actually a continuation of some works that you use with neon as well from before. So I want to hear about that, but I'll just share the most interesting thing for me was that there is also this element of like when we think about knowledge and archiving and collecting knowledge and knowledge production, when you look at these submarines, most of them, particularly the one at the back, you look at them and you're like, they're not going to make it. They're not going to make it as submarines. It's very obvious, but it's only obvious to us now. And
Yeah.
in parallel, the same question that I want to ask is also when I think especially in contemporary art, and like when we see neon in this kind of like context, we're like, oh, so analog. But I think the question I also want to ask is like, analog to whom? In a sense, and I think like you said this, Sui, you said that neons are emblematic of a time when like you know, like everything like that has
like
to do with
eternal acceleration and
Yeah.
advertisement and flashiness and eternal Fortschritt.
Yeah, this idea that anything with electricity can bring us to a point in the future, and
Yeah.
we're all dreaming of this future that we can all inhabit together. And it's very, very, very far in contrast with the sorts of like these sketches of submarines, because at one point in time, people thought something like that could have made it, and they could have invaded the space underwater and conquered the world. So that was maybe one of the most interesting things to me. And I think in alignment with the clay models, which completely also brings us on like another spaceship, this was something interesting for me as well. The idea of a spaceship, as in we naturally already think of ships as vehicles for us to be transported to another place that is entirely different, a vessel through which we invade, and maybe in some parts colonize another space that maybe wasn't ours. But a spaceship, as in anything, could also be a spaceship as long as you are traveling through space. And it doesn't necessarily also have to be outer space. But so the clay models are actually replicas of the furthest object ever found in space by humankind. And maybe you can tell us why this was interesting for you.
Yeah, so this exhibition was originally planned for 2020 at some point, and then was postponed a couple of times, which in a sense was good, because then the clay came in the exhibition as well. And the exhibition of the work I did before this one, I was thinking a lot about deep time, deep future, and the knowledge that is the knowledge we have about the deep history of Earth that for us now seems so fictional because it is so unimaginably far away. And then on the other hand, by trying to understand this history in the past, only in that way can we even try to understand what might await us in not 500 years, but maybe 50,000 years, which is already, like, this is still a graspable number, but it's already an unimaginably far time scale. So in my last work, it was very much an imagination of, like, how are we going to live in a million years? How are we going to travel through space? What materials will we have to get from space? And then I, in intersection with this set of works, I started to think about spaceships as submarines, and that in these spaceships we are very much intruders in space, just like the submarines sort of are in the ocean. And these little clay models are like, clay is such a primitive material. Like, the first art objects, the first kitchenware, practical objects were formed of clay, and so I decided to make a model of it's called Ultima Thule, this object in space that is the furthest object that we've managed to take a picture of so far. And by humankind, I mean the Huygens probe that was sent to space, originally even without a specific goal to go to. Like, it took this space probe so long to get so far that only by the time it almost reached the border of where we can have access to the space probe, this object in space was found, and it was decided that the ultimate goal for the space probe was to take a picture of this thing that is a very random asteroid on the outer edge of the axis we have so far in space. And yeah, the unimaginable distance that is inherent in this picture of this asteroid, for me, had very much to do with this, like, human urge to basically invade, to explore, go into the ocean, make it our own territory, exploit it, or on the other hand, go into space, exploit it, invade it, but also learn about it and explore it.
So is there a question of, like, how much is learning also invading?
Yeah, it's a fine line, and I'm thinking about that question a lot, because especially with the ocean, like, of course we want to learn about it, find all the species that are in there, but the more we go in there, the more we disturb this ecosystem as well. It's a question of observing the experiment, but then also influencing the experiment by just the pure presence there.
I can extrapolate that to thinking about, like, also, like, being tourists or being sort of like visiting people, like coming to a place, like, I think it's very common, and and I do think it's genuine as well. Like we visit places to want to learn more about their culture and their geography and everything. But also, if you zoom out and look at it over time, on a more macro scale, when you have more foreign visitors to a place also changes, not just because of your individual presence, but by like the collective presence and entrance of people who are foreign to a place. The place changes, it gentrifies, in order for you to learn about, or even on a personal level. I think sometimes, and I think especially in the last few years, when you want to ask someone about their experience, just to learn about it, it's like, it's also a little bit intrusive because they have to be in that vulnerable space in order to share with you, and it is a sort of invasiveness, in a way, in different scales. And I think one thing that was interesting for me in the research of this exhibition was to learn that submarines are, until today, the most important and the largest produced technology in warfare until today. There's nothing as dangerous as submarines, and most of it is because we mostly don't see them. And so I think I wanted to, I think at this point, maybe like I want to return to this very, very basic definition of technology in terms of anthropology and philosophy. Technology is defined as the intrinsic as the extension of the human self, or of the self, if you want to apply it to other creatures as well. And I think a lot of times when we see like problems with, like when we think of technology, of course we think of AI and crypto and the metaverse and VR and all that. But I think it's always very important to scale down and think of this very basic definition of technology, because then we can understand things around us a little bit better, in the sense of, relating to previous exhibitions that Sanatorium has, the repertoire of artists that they've had. For example, looking at the phone as an extension of yourself, and therefore understanding it better. And to see that with that, say, through the phone, or through the phone, I am experiencing the world in a different way than I would have experienced it without. And I think maybe even the most basic definition of it would be, so to say, if I put a twig into the soil, in order for the ants to climb up the twig to meet me, and in order for me to meet the ants, this stick as a twig is also a technology. And I think in terms of understanding the world, and of course situating all these thoughts like within this present moment when we're going through, I think even if most of us aren't really aware, I think there are a lot of fundamental shifts and advancements in the tech world, so to say. But really, I think it's really important to understand, to be reminded of this very basic definition of technology in terms of understanding how we are actually understanding the world. And there's also definitely a layer of subjectivity here. And I want to talk a little bit about the title of the exhibition, but maybe I will just read one paragraph from this note that I've written for this exhibition. So, Trembling in Every Direction, which is the exhibition's title, references Edouard Glissant, not because I had seen the documentary One World in Relation. I'm admitting I haven't seen this documentary, but I'm quoting it, where Glissant said, "We understand the world better when we tremble with it, for the world trembles in every direction." So I'm referencing it not because I had actually seen the documentary where he spoke it, but because I had read the sentence quoted by Paul Preciado in his book, An Apartment on Uranus. And I want to admit this because I want to point out the provenance of knowledge behind creative outputs, even in an instance as minute as my curating of this exhibition. Because I think really like you have footnotes and you have definitely like everyone has their pathway towards how they understand the world, or how they understand, or how they've come to a certain topic at a certain point. And I think and and also when you have these little bits of discoveries, I mean, on a greater scale, if you're a scientist, you know, or an entrepreneur, they turn into inventions, which are then building blocks for the next discoveries and then the next inventions, and ad infinitum. And therefore, I want to ask also, what about the pieces in the stack which are proven wrong, as has happened in history time and time again? Hat tip to the little submarines that we have over there. And also, by the way, this book, An Apartment on Uranus, is itself an escape to Uranus, which is now what we know as a planet, but it was dismissed as just another star in prehistoric times because it's very dim. And so you have this, it's really important to remember that in science, you also have a lot of, like you have, as much as you have discovery, you have also disproving. And I think this is where Nina's work comes in at a really crucial point, because her work is really about this, like blurring the boundaries between science and fiction, and how, you know, when you talk about deep time, something that has happened maybe so far away before or in the future might as well be experienced to us as fiction. And therefore, thinking like this also gives us the agency to invent our own sorts. I want to say even narrative, but I think I would just go ahead and just say realities and truths. And so, like, yeah, I think provenance, as you know, I think in a more relatable sense, we think of provenance in the art market as like who has held this piece of work until it has reached these certain hands. But I also think it's important to think about provenance in knowledge, because there are definitely many layers, these Lego blocks that have stacked up, that I think these days, there's a term that I encountered more recently called idea Lego, which is basically saying like you have these blocks and it's important to think about like the composability of ideas. And yeah, if you have anything to say about.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, what you just pointed out, this actual subjectivity of knowledge is something that like always continuously comes up in my work, I think. And yeah, how knowledge production and what we think the truth or certainty is changes over time, and how we gain knowledge, and how social circumstances also change the way we gather knowledge, just like with Natasha's situation as well. Suppose like today's social situation or climate makes it possible, or makes it more open for her to blur gender boundaries in this like traditional form of knowledge that she's exploring there.
Does anyone have questions?
Something just more like a double check or summary. First of all, congratulations on the exhibition, and thank you for the elaboration. It was quite remarkable. I keep on thinking about this, art and technology, art as technology thing, because yes, we are newly used to thinking of them as a continuum, but we're more familiar with technology being considered art lately, like when it reaches some high point, or sometimes when it just fuses with narrative. But for art to be considered technology, like at that point, I was also going to ask about how you approach the word technology, which you already, explained. Technology is an extension of self. So I just wanted to double check on that. Like when you say that we should be able to consider art as technology, by technology you mean an extension of the self.
Yes.
In this respect, or could we just go on and generalize more and say technology as means of sense making? I don't know how could that be polarized a bit more. I'd be very curious to discuss about that.
So this is definitely like a thesis or like a proposition that I am making through the whole experience and process of creating this exhibition. That art is technology, and this is very controversial, and a lot of people will definitely like throw rocks at me if I were to say this even more. But I think a lot of it has come from like, okay, I really like in the last 2 years or the last 3 years, I really want to understand like why is it that people are crazy for these kind of like digital art aesthetics? Why is it that also at the same time we are always asking ourselves, or we're always like trying to make the distinction like, okay, this thing is art and this is not art. And like this thing that is created with technology, let's say, okay, let me just make it super obvious to us, like some NFT art or like some NFT pieces. Oh yeah, I can consider this art, but this is not really art. You know, why is it that we're always like making these distinctions? And it's as if like we're constantly, I think, also giving credit to, again, Walter Benjamin for like putting out these like propositions that we always have to extend and like alter the boundaries of what we consider art according to whatever technological advancement we have at the moment. But then it's always like, okay, we have to change the boundaries of art according to technology. But if we understand technology to be this, so I think to answer your question, the very basic definition of technology, as I said, was like this extension of the self in anthropological terms. But I think an added layer to that is like an extension of the self to understand the world. And when I say that, I actually mean more like to understand or to experience science even, as in technology and science are not the same thing. And I think it's really important to think about that. And I think that I will also share that I was very inspired by the work of some racial theorists, mainly Ruha Benjamin, who has written a book called Race After Technology. But in that book, actually, like most of it was also to, of course, in the book, she and her research basically proposes that in big tech, a lot of it is already like, you know, obviously very biased against racial minorities and other forms of minorities. But the other thesis that she's making, which I think is missed a lot, is that race itself is a technology as well, as in it is the architecture that designs, that informs the systems that we design. And so in that sense, if we can think of things that are maybe just, you know, just passing notions to us, or things that are immaterial maybe, or even just a practice as technology, then why can't we also think of art as a technology, and not just thinking of art as like constantly having to match up to technology as Walter Benjamin proposes? Like, why not? Because clearly, in my opinion, when I look at Natasha's work and when I look at Nina's work, they are proposing a way of understanding the world through fiction, through speculative thinking, and through a remapping of different narratives and in their specific, whether it's as specific geography-wise as Natasha has with the Minasan tribe, or on the planetary scale as Nina has.
So in that sense, technology is also just creative problem solving.
That's interesting because do we see everything as a problem to be solved? This is also another really big question, I think, in the realm of design, and I definitely think that we should always like question that if everything that is new, that is put out in the world, has to solve a problem. Because I think definitely, like in the tech world and in the startup world, we're always asking, what problem are you solving? And if there's no problem you're solving, then you're not going to make it, or you're not going to get funded, or etc. So a little bit of context. I also work in an incubator where we incubate creatives to say, like, have their own models and systems to put something out in the world that's different from just an artwork. And so I do encounter this question a lot. And so this is a super great question. Thank you for asking it. But I think instead of approaching things like, what problem are you solving? I think the better question to ask is always, how is the world different without this existing? Like, what is the difference that you are bringing? And a lot of times, even just a different perspective on something, on a way of life, on a ritual, on a daily ritual, like something that is a different perspective, has really maybe enough impact or enough influence to, convince people to be like a part of your team, or to ride on your train. But this is definitely interesting, and engaging with the unknown. Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anyone else who'd like to share, like a thought or question?
Yeah. I mean, we can also like turn the exhibition back on, and you can always ask questions. Like, we're here, and then we can, yeah, you can ask questions in a more informal, less exposing way.
Yeah.
Which I love about your shrink, and it's really lovely to think about how that works with nature. Yeah. I've never thought about like how. Yeah, it works both ways. So this is definitely a fact that like drew me into this, thinking that, all right, it's not just us that's doing it to us. This like, yeah, this like really loud background noise that is so powerful actually, but it's so small somehow.
But I guess you're also like putting it out there that, like, okay, like, I mean, and obviously this is not without reason. This is like for sure 100% valid. But like, we love to blame humans for like putting out noise and dirt and contaminating nature and ecologies and all that. But I think with this work, by talking about the pistol shrimp, you're kind of making this like statement that actually things are already really noisy, even without humans. And it's sort of like giving us another perspective on like the different kinds of dynamics and the engagement and communication that happens.
It suggests the perspective change, but it's also necessary to clarify that humans are the worst when it comes to environmental damage. Like, it's interesting to think about it that way, but I feel like this is kind of a statement, as in my last work when I was proposing, like I was speculating about how in a million years we will go to space, to asteroids, to harvest oil and other hydrocarbons there, which is like yeah, it's something very speculative to think about now, but also in today's discussion and climate of global warming, climate change, like it's really not a good idea, but it's still interesting to think about because it reminds us of what we're doing to ecosystems today already. And in the same way, one can think about this work by thinking about this noise in the ocean and how it's able to disturb these big monstrous submarines to the ecosystem. Like this is what humans are doing, but 100 times worse to these fragile ecosystems. But yeah, it's important to perspective change and interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we have no further questions, then I think we can call it a day.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for coming.